Good morning. This is Ron. It is Sunday, the 22nd. I'm sorry, I had to think there. I was about to say the 12th. The 22nd of April. Welcome to Story Time. Okay, so good morning. And first thing that I wanted to talk about was a little bit of an editorial, social, and cultural comment. Then I'm going to go ahead and get into Ayn Rand, Rush Limbaugh. No, as a matter of fact, this time today, no Rush Limbaugh. It's going to be actually Miles Davis. A little bit of Miles Davis in his Playboy interview to illustrate something, and then the joke book. So, what I wanted to get onto in terms of editorial and cultural observation was that there was a time when I was working with Uber, and I was driving people various places, and I had a call to go to a hotel in downtown Los Angeles. I went to the hotel to pick up my fares, which turned out to be a man and a woman, and from India, and they wanted to go, I think, to Santa Monica, something like of that nature. But anyhow, I pull up and I get into the driveway, and I just pull into the driveway, and one of the employees, the hotel employees, comes out. He's like the guy that directs traffic for the cars, where to go and whatnot. And he comes out and he goes, says something and calls me boss. Calls me boss. And I said to him, my name's not Boss. And he said, well, then get out of my effing driveway. And then walks away. And I told him to F you or whatever, because I was outraged by that. One of the things that really has bothered me is the propensity of usually young men, and most of the time they're Hispanic, young Hispanic men, that will call you boss. Boss is a slang term, a jail, a prison slang term used for the prison guards. I'm not a prison guard. I'm not your prison guard. Not only that, but even if it were buddy or pal, it's inappropriate. I'm not your friend. If you want to talk to your friends in an informal way, that's between you and your friends. And if they accept that, then that's fine. But you don't walk up to a complete stranger and show them no respect by treating them informally, calling them buddy or pal, or in this case, boss. Now, the way that the individual reacted, most of the time when I've confronted, because I get this not only at this hotel, but I've gotten it at McDonald's. I pull up to pay for my order. Okay, boss, your order, the total will be X. And I've told them, excuse me, but my name's not Boss. If you want to call me Sir or Mister, that's fine. Most of these guys are contrite. If you tell them that, then they get kind of sheepish about it, and they apologize. They give you a weak little apology and whatnot. And but you make your point. And the next time I come through and I get that same employee, they remember and they call me Sir or Mister instead of Boss. But this individual responded with hostility. And I know that the reason that he did so is that there are people, two basic types of people in the United States of America today. Those that know that life is fundamentally about ethics and ethical principles and doing what's right and avoiding doing what's wrong, because that's the path to a happy life, a happy, fulfilled, meaningful life. Then there are those that pretend that life is a struggle, that life is a never-ending series of battles and power struggles between that particular individual and everybody else they come in contact with. So in this particular case, Mr. Hotel employee, he is calling me boss, not just as an offhand remark, as it was in the case of the McDonald's employee, but he is doing it as a sign of power, that he's in charge here. He'll do whatever he wants to do. He'll talk to me in any way he wants to talk to me, and there's not a damn thing I can do about it. Now, the one of the proper ways for me to have handled it at the time would have been to go to his supervisor, just simply find a place to park, pull over, and demand to know who his supervisor is. Go get his supervisor, have him come back out and read the supervisor the riot act in front of this employee and explain to him it's wrong and why it's wrong, and then just go ahead and leave. So we're dealing with the situation from right and wrong and not engaging in a power struggle. Now, much to my credit, what I didn't do was say something like, "Well, I'll stay here in the driveway as long as I want to," kind of thing. I didn't go to a supervisor because, like I said, my fares were standing right there, and so I needed to get on with my business. It was better for me to go ahead and make the money than it was to frustrate these individuals, my fares, by dragging the situation out and going and making a complaint with this guy's supervisor. So you're going to find that in life, that when you have people, particularly that'll treat you blatantly rudely, they will demand information from you that they have no right to have. They will make presumptions about the relationship that they have with you, that pretend that you're friends or that you're well acquainted when, as a matter of fact, you're not. And you're in most cases you're going to find that these people are not really down for the struggle. They don't know why they're doing it. They just do things because all of their friends do it. A lot of people are using this boss thing, making this boss um, reference because their friends do it. Friends call it, they see their friends call people boss, so he's going to call people boss. And that's actually rule number one. And anytime you're dealing with socialists, a lot of times people will ask, what can I do? What can I do? In this particular situation, people are calling me boss. What can I do about it? There's not much you can do in order to force this guy not to call you boss. The one thing that you can do that is potent, however, is don't spread the disease. Okay, if you have a cold and you go to work, you don't go around sneezing on everybody else. Okay, well, you recognize the cold is a bad thing, the cold or the flu, and so you don't spread it. You don't sneeze into your hands and then wipe it on somebody's face, for instance, right? Same thing that goes here. People are treating you in a way that is overly familiar. The best remedy is don't pass it along. You hear people saying, calling other people boss. Don't call other people boss. Okay. The other thing about it too is that from a right and wrong standpoint, you have to remember where you are when the situation happens. If you're on your own turf, if you're at home in your office or office building on your property, then you can act in ways that you can't if you're on public property or you're on somebody else's private property. And that was my situation as well. I was in a situation where I was, if I was in the driveway, then I was probably on Hilton property. So I have to do things the Hilton way. That's another thing. If I go and I make a big fuss out of this, there's no guarantee that the boss is going to do anything except maybe ask me to leave. Because after all, it's their property. So that's another thing. And so you know where it is that you stand, whose property you're on before you make your decisions, and that'll help to make sure that you're doing things right instead of always trying to be a power player. And a lot of this comes from literally the Democrats come out and promise in speeches to especially minority groups, blacks, Hispanics, etc., that they will empower them. They say it, I've heard it dozens of times. We will empower you, to give them first of all, the idea that they don't have enough power or perhaps don't have any power. And second of all, that power is something that's handed out. And it isn't. The matter of fact is we all in the United States have the same power. We have the power to meet our responsibilities, because that's what power is. Power is the ability to meets one's responsibilities. So, anyways, when I come back, I'm going to be going ahead and continuing with chapter 15 of Ayn Rand's philosophy, Who Needs It? Okay, so now we're on. I'm back, and it is chapter 15 of Philosophy Who Needs It: Censorship, Local and Express, in which Ayn Rand is critiquing some Supreme Court decisions dealing with pornography. And her basic point is that the uh, Supreme Court erred in these cases by basically censoring, creating a censorship standard when they basically should have gone the other direction and allowed people, the individual, to decide for him or herself what it is that's obscene or not obscene, and take appropriate action, such as staying away from a particular movie theater, or staying away from whatever literature or movies that might be they might consider obscene. We do not demand of legislatures, quote, scientifically certain criteria of legislation, unquote, the decision affirms. Although there is no conclusive proof of a connection between antisocial behavior and obscene material, the legislature of Georgia could quite reasonably determine that such a connection does or might exist. In deciding Roth, this court implicitly accepted that a legislature could legitimately act on such a conclusion to protect, quote, the social interest in order and morality, unquote. If the notion that something might be a threat to the, quote, social interest, unquote, is sufficient to justify suppression, then the Nazi or the Soviet dictatorship is justified in exterminating anyone who, in its belief, might be a threat to the, quote, social interest, unquote, of the Nazi or the Soviet, quote, community, unquote. Whatever theory of government such a notion represents, it is not the theory of America's founding fathers. Strangely enough, Chief Justice Burger seems to be aware of it, because he proceeds to call on a pre-American precedent. Quote, from the beginning of civilized societies, legislators and judges have acted on various unprovable assumptions. Such assumptions underlie much lawful state regulation of commercial and business affairs, unquote. This is preeminently true, and look at the results. Look at the history of all the governments in the world prior to the birth of the United States. Ours was the first government based on and strictly limited by a written document, the Constitution, which specifically forbids it to violate individual rights or to act on whim. The history of the atrocities perpetrated by the other kinds of governments, unrestricted governments acting on unprovable assumptions, demonstrates the value and validity of the original political theory on which this country was built. Yet here is the Supreme Court citing all those bloody millennia of tyranny as a precedent for us to follow. If this seems inexplicable, the very next sentence of Mr. Berger's decision gives a clue to the reasons and a violently clear demonstration of the role of precedent in the development of law. The next sentence seems to unleash a whirling storm of feathers as chickens come flying home from every direction to roost on everyone's coop, perch, or fence in retribution for every evasion, compromise, injustice, and violation of rights perpetrated in past decades. The next sentence is, quote, the same, a basis of unprovable assumptions, is true of the federal securities, antitrust laws, and a host of other federal regulations, unquote. Formally, I would have to say, quote, oh, my Chief Justice, unquote. Informally, I want to say, quote, oh, brother, unquote. Quote, on the basis of these assumptions, Mr. Berger goes on, quote, both Congress and state legislators have, for example, drastically restricted associational rights by adopting antitrust laws and have strictly regulated public expression by issuers of and dealers in securities, profit sharing coupons, and trading stamps, commanding what they must and may not publish and announce. Understandably, those who entertain an absolutist view of the First Amendment find it uncomfortable to explain why rights of association, speech, and press should be severely restrained in the marketplace of goods and money, but not in the marketplace of pornography, unquote. Quick comment here is absolutist view. And when you hear somebody using that kind of an expression, instead of saying those people that say that um, the First Amendment applies to everybody are wrong, but instead they refer to it, they give it a description. Another word that's frequently used in this context is subjectivist context is extreme. When people want to avoid using right and wrong, they have to find some other kind of word or expression to fill in. Most often it's extreme or extremism. In this particular case, it is, let's see, absolutist. So basically, what you're happening when you're not dealing right and wrong and you're dealing with subjectivist um, metaphysics is that you're suggesting that everything is equal. All ideas are equal. All behaviors are basically equal, except as to popularity. And that's the way to make the decision about what it is that one should or should not do. And that's false on its face. On the collectivist premise, there is, of course, no answer. The only answer in today's situation is to check that premise and reject it, and start repealing all those catastrophically destructive violations of individual rights and of the Constitution. But this is not what the court majority has decided. Forgetting his own warning about the just quote gestative propensity unquote of the judicial and legislative processes, Chief Justice Burger accepts the precedent in an irrevocable absolute and punishes the country many steps further toward the abyss of statism. Likewise, quote, the decision continues, when legislatures and administrators act to protect the physical environment from pollution and to preserve our resources of forests, streams, and parks, they must act on such imponderables as the impact of a new highway near or through an existing park or wilderness area. Thus, the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1968 and the Department of Transportation Act of 1966 have been described by Mr. Justice Black as a solemn determination of the highest lawmaking body of this nation that beauty and health-giving facilities of our parks are not to be taken away for public roads without hearings, fact findings, and policy determinations under the supervision of a cabinet officer. The fact that a congressional directive reflects unprovable assumptions about what is good for the people, including imponderable aesthetic assumptions, is not a sufficient reason to find that statute unconstitutional. Isn't it? Oh, unconstitutional, unquote. Isn't it? If it is not, then the imponderable aesthetic assumptions of government officials are entitled to invade the field of literature and art, as Mr. Berger's decision is inviting them to do. The ugly hand of altruism slithers into the decision in a passage that sideswipes the concept of free will. Quote, we have just noted, for example, that neither the First Amendment nor free will precludes states from having blue sky laws to regulate what sellers of securities may write or publish about their wares. Such laws are to protect the weak, the uninformed, the unsuspecting, and the gullible from the exercise of their own volition. It is for this kind of purpose that the rest of us who are not weak, uninformed, unsuspecting, and gullible are to be protected from our volition and deprived of the right to exercise it. So much for the relation of altruism to rights and freedom. Here's another chicken flying home. Quote, states are told by some that they must await a laissez-faire market solution to the obscenity pornography problem, paradoxically by people who have never otherwise had a kind word to say for laissez-faire, particularly in solving urban, commercial, and environmental pollution problems, unquote. The decision contains many other homing chickens of this kind, an entire barnyard of them, many more than I have space to quote, but these are sufficient to give you the nature, style, and spirit of that ruling. And then next time we'll start getting into the dissenting opinions, starting with Justice Brennan. So when I come back next, I'm going to be, again, dealing with an interview by Playboy with Miles Davis. Okay, I'm back, and so one of the things that you can learn a lot about how the left operates, the tricks, the techniques that they use in order to be successful, you can learn in interviews. And so I'd gotten a copy of it's a book like 50 Years of Playboy Interviews, and so because they make some useful illustrations of particular points. In this particular case, the point that I want to illustrate again is smuggling in a presumption and is not presenting evidence or proof of something, just presuming that something is true. And all statements are false until proven true, because you can't do it the other way around. You can't presume something is true and then ask people to prove it false, because that's trying to prove a negative, and that's impossible. So here is the little exchange. When he first opens up with Miles Davis, who is, by the way, a jazz trumpeter who has passed away. Playboy asks, linked with your musical renown is your reputation for bad temper and rudeness to your audiences. Would you comment? Davis, why is it that people have just so much to say about me? It bugs me because I'm not that important. Some critics that don't have nothing else to do started this crap about I don't announce numbers, I don't look at the audience, I don't bow or talk to people, I walk off the stage and all that. Look, man, all I am is a trumpet player. I can only do one thing, play my horn, and that's what's at the bottom of the whole mess. I ain't no entertainer, ain't trying to be one. I am one thing, a musician. Most of what's said about me is lies in the first place. Everything I do, I got a reason. So, and he continues on with this, but this is enough to suffice. He got trapped. Simply put, Miles Davis got trapped. He got rooked. He got hoodwinked. He got ripped off here with this question, because again, the question is your reputation. What reputation? That's the proper answer at this particular point. Your reputation for bad temper and rudeness to your audiences. Would you comment? I have a question. What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about, because to do anything else is to concede the point. They haven't proven anything. The interviewer hasn't proven that Miles Davis is rude or bad tempered or anything. Provide some evidence that I'm rude or bad tempered. Then, if there's enough evidence and sufficient to create proof that I have a bad temper, now we have something to talk about. And also what it does is, again, it puts him in the position of having to prove a negative, that he's not something that the interviewer presumes he is. And he can't defend himself. It becomes an arbitrary question. And so the proper one is to say, what are you talking about? Okay? And one of the best ways to do it is when he says, well, you have a reputation for bad temper and rudeness. No, I don't. Just deny it flat out. No, I don't. And if that puts the interviewer on the spot to either put up or shut up, either produce the evidence that shows I'm bad-tempered, etc., or let's move on to the next question. But with his response, with Davis's response, it's defensive. So and it also basically, the whole response that he's got going right here makes it sound as though he agrees with the interviewer that he is rude and bad-tempered. He sounds like he's trying to rationalize his behavior. And basically, the best thing that he could have done in that position was just simply say, false. Just throw a flag on the play and say, no, nobody says that. What he says, and I like it. The interviewer didn't even say who. Usually, at least they'll say your critics. Your critics accuse you of having a bad temper. In this particular case, it's just linked with your musical renown is your reputation for bad temper and rudeness. Baloney. You just say, no, you're absolutely wrong. But again, this is the way that the left operates. They're going to smuggle these kinds of things into conversations, and they're going to pull this kind of stunt. It's not just about famous people being interviewed by Playboy magazine. It's about what you and I put up with each and every day, from our families, from our friends, from our coworkers, from complete strangers who will come up and use these tactics and techniques to put us on the spot, to make us feel uncomfortable, and to ultimately to get us to do one of two things: either join the movement because we psychologically we're overwhelmed and we think, well, it's inevitable, or to shut up. And I'm here to tell you that that's a false dichotomy. There's a third way, at least a third way, and that is that you don't have to join the movement, and you don't have to shut up either. So when I come back, I'm going to go ahead and get with the New York City cab driver's joke book, and see you in a minute. Okay, I'm back, and so I've been doing jokes from the New York City cab driver's joke book by Jim Peach. So let's see. How about this one? Here we go. What do you have when you have one lawyer in town? Too little work. What do you have when you have two lawyers in town? Too much work. Two friends, an Italian boy and a Jewish boy, come of age at the same time. The Italian boy's father presents him with a brand new pistol. On the other side of town, at his bar mitzvah, the Jewish boy receives a beautiful gold watch. The next day in school, the two boys are showing each other what they got. It turns out that each boy likes the other's present better, and so they trade. That night, when the Italian boy is at home, his father sees him looking at the watch. "Where'd you get that a watch?" asks the man. The boy explains that he and Sammy had traded. The father blows his top. "What are you, stupid a boy? What's the matter you? Some a day you maybe gonna get a married. Then maybe some a day you gonna come home and find your wife in a bed with another man. What are you gonna do then? Look at your watch and say, how long are you gonna be?" How many actors does it take to change a light bulb? 100. One to change the bulb, and 99 to say, "I could have done that." A woman starts dating a doctor. Before too long, she becomes pregnant, and they don't know what to do. About 9 months later, just as about the time she's going to give birth, a priest goes into the hospital for prostate gland infection. The doctor says to the woman, "I know what we'll do. After I've operated on the priest, I'll give the baby to him and tell him it was a miracle." "Do you think it'll work?" she asks the doctor. "It's worth a try," he says. So the doctor delivers the baby and then operates on the priest. After the operation, he goes into the priest and says, "Father, you're not going to believe this." "What?" says the priest. "What happened?" "You gave birth to a child." "But that's impossible," says the priest. "I just did the operation," insists the doctor. "It's a miracle. Here's your baby." About 15 years go by, and the priest realizes that he must tell his son the truth. One day he sits the boy down and says, "Son, I have something to tell you. I'm not your father." The son says, "What do you mean you're not my father?" The priest replies, "I'm your mother. The archbishop is your father." And that'll about do it for today. And tomorrow, Monday the 23rd, I will be at it again. And until then, thank you very much for joining me, and have a great day.